Welcome to this webinar on planning a unit in our Sensible Assessment Practices series. All webinar topics are designed to support teachers and include the start of the school year, building community, the instruction and assessment cycle, and focusing on sensible assessment practices. This webinar, beginning with a unit designed for success, will share an introductory unit to promote engagement, build community, and focus on student social and emotional well-being. Linda Darling-Hammond articulates the importance of facilitating activities so students are actively participating in their own learning. The ultimate goal is that they become drivers of their education and not passive participants. By creating an initial unit that allows for student success, teachers lay the foundation for students to take risks in their learning throughout the year. As we discuss the unit we designed, we want to stress that the goal of the unit is to build community, give students a feeling of success in that supportive community, and to improve their comfort level so they are willing to explore and take risks or become drivers in their own learning. Before we leave this slide, Linda's name is linked to a panel discussion with her, Doug Fisher, and Tyrone Howard entitled The Contrasting Realities of Reopening Schools, Understanding Inequities to Support the Whole Child. This panel discussion is also linked and described in the resources at the end of this presentation. Today we will share some thoughtful suggestions to support you as you build this year's introductory unit. We will discuss ways that activities can promote equity and student engagement, foster connectivity with peers, and allow students to feel successful. Teachers know that instruction must be accessible to all learners across all abilities and cultural backgrounds. Teaching should be intentional and delivered in a way that meets the needs of all learners, regardless of whether the learning environment is in person or remote. High-quality instruction is designed around the Connecticut core standards. Students should be actively participating in meaningful work as educators use formative measures to determine what students already know and what they need to know. While these factors are just as critical when building an introductory unit, the needs of returning students in the context of this pandemic is complex and sensitive. Teachers should initially be working to build a classroom of trust while they are getting to know their students. Reciprocally, students are building relationships with their teacher and new classmates while navigating new learning environments, routines, and expectations in a context that may feel overwhelming. The school year should start with an introductory lesson that is accessible and meaningful with grade level skills embedded throughout. Rather than focusing solely on what students already know, focus on delivering a unit that builds student engagement and creatively integrates the grade level standards. As you construct your introductory unit, take this opportunity to create something that not only encourages active participation, but personal success. Begin with a topic that is familiar and accessible to all learners themselves. The activities within the unit should provide opportunities for students to share with a partner, a small group, and the whole class to facilitate community building. Introductory lessons might also involve using a review approach for certain skills like math. Select content that emphasizes important prerequisite standards for new learning in the current grade. For example, in mathematics, this may be adding basic fractions as opposed to adding fractions with unlike denominators. While the first unit is ideally an on-grade unit, in some instances, it may be necessary for the unit to focus on expectations from the prior grade. The length of a review unit will depend on the needs of the students in the classroom. It may last as little as a few days, but is not intended to extend beyond 2 to 3 weeks. Lessons should be designed so that all students, including students with high needs, will have a high probability of success. As the first unit is implemented, teachers should provide constructive instructional feedback and recommendations based on formative assessment practices, not formal assessments, to each student. Share this information with the parents and guardians of your students. Frequent and consistent communication is key, especially to promote student and family engagement. As mentioned, instruction must be accessible for all learners. The Universal Design for Learning Guidelines, created by CAS, a nonprofit education research and development organization, provides a framework to support teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. The first principle is engagement, which addresses the why of learning. Students all learn and interact differently. Some students are most comfortable working alone, while others prefer to work with peers. Certain children are extremely self-motivated, while others may be more reticent to participate in a project or begin an activity. The second is representation and captures the what of learning. This speaks to the fact that students learn and internalize information and concepts differently. A different approach to teaching and learning might be required for students who are English learners or students with an IEP. Finally, the third principle is action and expression, which focuses the how of learning. Everyone has different ways of expressing themselves, and some students may be better writers. Others may prefer to express themselves orally. Students who are English learners or students with an IEP may need to express themselves in ways that do not include speaking and writing. The chart can be used both vertically and horizontally to structure unit development. Vertically, the guidelines are organized according to 3 principles of universal design, or UDL. These principles act as suggestions to reduce barriers for all learners and maximize learning opportunities. When examining and incorporating the content of this chart horizontally, each row offers specific goals aligned to the 3 overarching principles of learning. The first row, labeled Access, suggests ways to reach learning goals by offering options, not necessarily in the content learned, but in how students choose to access the content helps them connect to lessons. Students not only have some autonomy in their learning, but in how they demonstrate understanding, using authentic activities and incorporating ways for students to make sense. The second row, referenced as Build, suggests ways to foster a sense of community and to encourage students to collaborate, presenting information in multiple manners or alternative formats. This includes using various types of media and expanding on the way text is defined. Students can express their understanding of a concept using multiple modalities. Internalize, represented by the third row, suggests ways to empower learners through self-regulation, teaching coping skills and strategies, activating and validating prior knowledge, and enhancing students' ability to monitor their own progress and plan accordingly. These guidelines are just that, guidelines, and can be used in a myriad of ways. Mix and match to help students reach a specific learning goal. Most educators already incorporate these strategies, but as we reopen schools this fall, we need to be certain that any remaining barriers to learning have been removed. This may mean working with students while they use their computers in the classroom to prepare for the possibility of a switch to all remote learning. Mitigate difficulties and build routines while students have support from the teacher and the peers. Prepare for a fluid transition should that be necessary. Keep in mind these UDL goals as you are building your introductory lessons, and consider how your lessons can be aligned to the individual needs of your students. Formative assessment practices are a series of effective teaching practices inseparable from instruction. The process of formative assessment used in conjunction with universal design principles facilitate a learning environment that meets the various needs of a diverse group of learners. Formative assessment practices include clarifying the purpose of the learning and providing exemplars so students clearly understand the expectations. Teachers should use activities that engage students, eliciting evidence of their learning and providing feedback that helps learners know what they need to do to continue learning. Students are encouraged to consult with their peers and view them as learning resources which in turn increases student ownership of learning. Examples of formative assessment practices include questioning students about content, regular discussion with students about ideas or concepts, and gaining understanding and informing instruction based on quizzes, assignments, homework. Other formative assessment practices watch and listen before intervening when students are working. Formative assessment is not used for grading. Rather, it can be used before instruction to find out where students are and during instruction, to find out how they are progressing, something that benefits students, especially at-risk learners.
When designing initial units, be particularly sensitive to the varied needs of your returning students. Observe their behaviors carefully to determine if more support is needed. Creating a unit based on a topic that is familiar to all students encourages increased engagement and is low risk. Making the initial unit cross-disciplinary provides repeated exposure to the content. Use student performance on early informal assessments, such as a piece of writing, a small project, or an assignment to provide feedback and supplemental instruction to help gauge students' relative skill status. Employ a range of regular formative assessment practices that are integrated into the lessons given in the first few weeks of school to provide actionable feedback to students. Apply the results of ongoing formative assessment practices as another source of student information to adjust instruction, target incorrect or partial understanding, and to create supports to meet the diverse needs of students. Create flexible, short-term groupings of students based on initial profiles and alter them as necessary. Remember that grades are not important in the pre-assessments because they're meant to inform instruction. For modeling purposes, we've created a grade 5 unit, which you would be able to modify for the grade you teach. When developing the unit plan, incorporate universal design features and formative assessment practices. Connecting lessons within the unit will create the learning hooks. Be sure to incorporate procedures and activities across content areas that can be done on-site or remotely. This unit we designed is an example intended to promote community building, validate the range of emotions students are experiencing, and reinforce classroom norms and behaviors across content areas. We chose The Fun We Had by Isaac Asimov as our anchor literary text and supported that text with information articles we found online. After completing the text complexity placemat for the anchor and supporting text, we determined these to be appropriate for grades 5 and 6. Rather than beginning the unit with a text, we suggest starting with an online poll, even if students are already in the classroom, as a way to break the ice and share experiences. This poll will be used to incorporate math activities and to encourage students to delve deeper into the responses captured. Designing a class poll gives you the opportunity to gather important information about student experiences and to perform an emotional checkup on students. Students may be able to provide information about their own perceived areas of weakness and those skills they need to improve. It's a simple activity with no wrong answers, so students are bound to be successful. This is also a chance to determine if students have difficulties using their devices at a time when support is a step away. When results are explored in the various math activities woven into the unit, the analyzing of this valuable qualitative data can provide students with the opportunity to group and classify student responses, examine differences and commonalities among responses, and through this analysis, the responses can offer social and emotional benefits in which students validate their peers' feelings and experiences by illustrating that others have encountered similar circumstances. This type of poll creates opportunities for the teacher to better understand the specific situations of the students during the closing of school and to gain some insight into any difficulties they may have suffered. Teachers can follow up with mini lessons to reinforce or reteach those skills students felt they were unsupported with during the closure. Participating in discussions about the results of the poll to glean more information specific to the students is yet another opportunity to support learning in a way that creates a community. As a potential added option, students can create a similar poll to use with parents to help expand the information received and to build a link between school and home communities. The math activities used to review poll responses serve as a formative assessment for teachers concerning grade level math skills. When designing this introductory unit across content areas, we suggest the use of math content, including work studied in earlier grades that allows students to demonstrate their problem-solving proficiency. This introductory math lesson uses Claim 2 to model problems in pure mathematics and problems set in context. In this claim, math activities require students to construct their own solution pathway rather than follow a provided one. Students will need to select appropriate conceptual and physical tools to use. We searched for activities in Tools for Teachers, the new online resource for teachers from Smarter Balanced. Using the information from the poll, students can be asked to work individually or in pairs with the information collected to present it in multiple manners and draw conclusions. The same information can then be used to answer short word problems, compare and contrast, determine percentage versus actual numbers, or converting to percentage or fraction. Based on conclusions, students can brainstorm follow-up areas of interest that will develop ideas for lessons, such as remote learning study habits or computer skills, and these new ideas will be student-driven and authentic. At this point, consider using the literary text we chose. The Fun We Had by Isaac Asimov is a short story written in the 1950s about school in the year 2157. And amazingly enough, there's a resemblance to remote teaching and learning. Students can read the story as a whole group, in pairs, or alone. Provide information about the author and the time in which this was written to better understand what a classroom or school day might have been like in the 1950s. You might ask someone who went to elementary or middle school at that time to join you for a brief interview on the phone or on a digital platform. The guests can share their experiences at school and even compare them to the experiences in school now. To present information that incorporates the principles of UDL, you might want to create a PowerPoint of images and quotes for students to reference. Visual learners might benefit from a timeline of inventions used in schools across each decade. This can be made by the teacher, or students can research this and present their own timelines. Students could answer the question, what did the author get right about remote learning, in a discussion or in writing? To give learners options on how to interact with the text, we offer 2 videos of the fun they had. The first video of the text being read aloud, but there is no closed captioning. The lack of captioning hampers access for some students. The second video is a reading of the text while the text is displayed. While this is not the same as closed captioning, it will provide access to students who need to follow along using the text as support. Other options you'll need to consider, depending on your students' needs, may include Braille text, text reader programs, text presented with an interpreter, simplified text using support such as BoardMaker symbols, or the use of an augmentative or assistive communication device. After reading the story, students can answer questions verbally, in writing, or both. Remember to create activities that are universally designed and meet the needs of all your learners. Think about how students will engage. Do they have choices? How will students demonstrate their understanding? Consider a large group activity to create a concept map. Then create topic area work groups with tools such as graphic organizers or sentence completion models. Offer students choices. Instead of simply writing to a prompt, consider asking them to create a current job description compared to the job description for 2157. If you choose to conduct a close read of the text while annotating, you can break students into groups or model this as a whole class activity. Revisit sections of the text you marked during your first read. Annotate details that you notice. Make a list of questions you might still have. Write one conclusion you can from the story and support it with evidence from the text.
We want the students to understand that thousands of other children across the country share similar experiences during the extended school closures. To reinforce this fact and to validate how students feel about the experience of learning remotely, we chose two informational texts to pair with a literary anchor text, exposing students to multiple texts across a topic and including fiction and nonfiction provide additional opportunities to differentiate for students of varying support levels. As a resource to locate texts and activities, we use the Connecticut Learning Hub located on the CSCE main page. The Connecticut Learning Hub provides access to curated tools and resources to accelerate learning and advance equity. The link to the Hub is available in the resources listed at the end of this presentation. Students can then focus on sharing their opinions on distant learning. Encourage them to think about what they would have done to make the situation better or easier. Have students work with peers to brainstorm ideas to solve some of the issues that arise from the discussions. To support visual learners, consider asking students to make a Venn diagram representing the pros of distant learning and positive aspects of in-person learning. Try to have them find aspects of both that overlap. As a culminating activity, we chose an activity that includes art, writing, and speaking, all of which can be done remotely or in person. This lesson by the Smithsonian Learning Lab provides students with an engaging opportunity to learn from experts about the basics of curating an art exhibit. The video introduces students to a variety of techniques and designs used by professional artists and museum curators, all of whom design and build their own small exhibits as examples. Students determine a theme, which might be remote learning or the lockdown, gather objects to represent that theme, and then photograph it. The photograph can be labeled, and the student can write about the pieces they've chosen and what they represent. Later, students can present to the class or make a video of their speech. Teachers might pair students and have each pair share their mini exhibit and explanation to each other. Then, students present to the whole group about what they learned about their partner to promote the building of positive culture and group cohesion. Teachers can incorporate brainstorming activities along with guidelines to make this activity as open or structured as needed. As the school year begins, whether remotely or in person, remember that starting with activities that promote equity, build community, and allow for success are the perfect way to ease students back into the classroom during this confusing time. The Connecticut State Department of Education continues to provide guidance resources for districts to support the reopening of schools in the fall. The sensible assessment practices for 2021 and beyond, and the plan for reimagining Connecticut classrooms for continuous learning are foundational documents for supporting Connecticut students and teachers. Many of the overarching ideas in this webinar series are drawn from these resources. Connecticut's plan for school reopening in fall 2020, Adapt, Advance, Achieve, Connecticut's Plan to Learn and Grow Together, is the third of our foundational resources, and the plan expects districts to provide robust educational learning options to those students who choose temporarily to not participate in the in-school program due to individual considerations. Furthermore, in addition to in-person instruction, the reopening plan also expects districts to be prepared for blended learning or fully virtual scenarios that may be necessary based on changing health conditions in the community. Therefore, it is vital that students have access to the requisite device and adequate connectivity in homes to participate in virtual learning. The CSCE is making available nearly $100 million in federal funds to local school districts through the CARES Act. Some of these resources will be directed towards those students for whom devices and/or connectivity may be barriers to full participation in virtual learning. To close the digital divide in Connecticut and empower students across the state to learn from home, Governor Lamont recently announced that his administration is launching the Everybody Learns initiative to fill any device and/or connectivity gaps that still may remain. Here is a list of resources specific to this presentation. These are a few more resources we used when designing this presentation. Please contact the Connecticut State Department of Education staff in the Performance Office with any questions you might have. Thank you.